Well, thank you for coming. This is the commencement of our enforcement operation on border restrictions, where we're stopping vehicles entering South Australia, and advising them that if they are continuing into South Australia, they'll be required to self-quarantine for a period of 14 days, and we are issuing notifications to that effect. This has come about as a result of a declaration I made today, authorising this particular activity so that we can do our bit to reduce the spread of the coronavirus in South Australia and hopefully keep some of our more vulnerable community members safe from this infection.
Do you expect that people will listen to the instructions and follow the rules?
It's our expectation that people will comply with this direction. It is a reality that we're dealing with ordinary South Australians in the by and main who are coming back to South Australia, and I think that people will appreciate there's a need for people to comply with this direction so that we can ensure the safety of our broader community. There are consequences for people who do not comply with this direction. Individuals can be prosecuted for failing to obey the direction and potentially receive a maximum $20,000 fine.
How does it actually work here at the border?
Okay, what's going to be happening is police officers will be approaching vehicles as they come through the checkpoint, and speaking to the occupants of the vehicle, obtaining their details, and providing them with a notification in relation to their obligations, which is to go straight to an address they nominate where they can self-quarantine for a period of 14 days, and that no other person is able to enter that residence unless they live there or for emergency reasons. We'll also be providing opportunities for people to apply an exemption for certain circumstances, and that exemption requirement will be tested by the police officers, and if it is deemed to be appropriate, then the people will be exempt from the quarantine provisions.
Commissioner, there seems to be a bit of confusion, particularly from border communities, about how those exemptions will actually work. If someone is crossing the border multiple times a day because of where they live, is that an automatic exemption, or do they have to apply?
The system is, this direction applies to everybody who is arriving into South Australia, but the exemptions are relatively straightforward, and it involves a self-assessment process by the people who are seeking to utilise an exemption. People who live close to a border and have business or transactions that see them travelling between states on a regular basis will be subject to that exemption, and it's a relatively straightforward process. It is a self-assessment process which will be verified by police.
Is there any process to stop people who might actually deliberately try to skirt around these blocks and checks?
Well, the reality is there's no way of physically stopping every person entering South Australia without investing significant resources to that effect. So we are targeting the major arterial routes into South Australia, including by road, rail and by air, and we're expecting that people will voluntarily comply with this direction without having to be physically checked, but we also intend to target the volume of those people entering the state, and the intention is not to completely eradicate those people travelling in or requiring them to self-isolate, but it is to ensure that the volume of people who are entering South Australia comply with this direction.
So is the message just go straight home, don't stop for petrol, don't stop and stock up on groceries? Is that the message?
The message is, and the direction will be, that you are required to nominate an address that you're able to self-quarantine for a period of 14 days, and you must travel by the nearest, most practicable route to that address, and then self-isolate for that period. As with other people who have been required to quarantine, they'll have to rely on friends, family or other support if they require other goods or services during that quarantine period, and that's a reality for so many people in South Australia at the moment, including some of my staff, that people are managing, and they should be seeking assistance from friends and family.
What are those essential transport and travel services of people that came across the border, really?
There are a range of exemptions, and we can provide you a copy of that, but freight movement across the border is certainly one of those exemptions, and there'll be no issue with keeping freight moving through other jurisdictions that into South Australia. We're committed to making sure that essential services are able to continue. Groceries and other important items will still continue to be delivered without any hindrance.
We have a business owner here who's a bit concerned that he has customers who come from across the border about 80 k's away. The reality is some of those transactions might have to be ceased for a little while.
Well, the reality is, depending on the geographic location, that the exemption may not be applicable, and there are a lot of businesses that are hurting in South Australia and other states as well. So this is a consequence of this virus working its way through our community, and we're doing our very best to limit that, and it is acknowledged that that's going to have an impact on some businesses and some smaller communities.
It's a 24/7 operation.
At this point in time, yes, it's a 24/7 operation, and we'll be monitoring the volume of traffic travelling through these locations. But we are planning to be staffing these checkpoints for the foreseeable future at this time.
Commissioner, the announcement was made on the weekend. Obviously, the enforcement starts now. What about people who cross the border in that bit in between?
The announcement was made on Sunday in relation to closing the borders, and people have been required to comply with that self-quarantine direction. There is simply no way of knowing who transited into South Australia during that time, but they are subject to that requirement. We're obviously hopeful that they comply with that because it's in the greater interest of the community.
And it seems like there's quite substantial fines for people who don't comply, is that right?
That's right, there's a $20,000 fine for a person who does not comply with the direction, and for a body corporate it's $75,000. So there are significant consequences for not complying with this direction made under the Emergency Management Act.
How will that be policed? Will there be any checks, or how will you find out if people aren't complying?
We are receiving information from other members of the community about their observations in relation to non-compliance, and we are doing random checks on people based on our information as to who has recently returned to South Australia, and those random checks will continue.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Could I ask one? How about, say, farmers in the area who might have land on both sides of the border? Is that something that would be exempt?
Farmers and other primary producers who have properties that extend beyond borders or are in close proximity to borders will be exempt, and they'll find it quite easy to access those exemptions.